Really impressed by the turnout online tonight. I see so many familiar names and visitors from St. Paul, Minnesota, and Tacoma, Washington, Washington D.C. So I'm very glad to see many of our friends tuning in. Good evening and welcome to Legacy Unveiled, a program of three short films presented by Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages. I'm Frank Abe, producer director of the film Conscience and the Constitution, the first documentary that focused specifically on the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee. So our program this evening consists of three short films unveiling the ongoing legacy of the Nisei draft resistors of World War II, what the men that Paul Tsuneishii Ishii liked to refer to as the resistors of conscience. The occasion for this screening is the 22nd anniversary of the National JACL's apology ceremony for the actions of the wartime JACL to suppress resistance and really ostracize those who refused to be drafted from an American concentration camp. I'll introduce each of these three films, and we'll be joined in the conversation at various points by one of those Heart Mountain resistors, Hoshizaki. And at the end of our discussion of the three films, you'll have a chance to ask any questions you have of TAC, or myself and others, by leaving a comment in the Zoom chat or speaking live on screen. But first, a word about our presenter. A personal reflection of mine. In 2022, when COVID first hit, I think we all remember how the global pandemic stunned and isolated us. All social gatherings, including camp pilgrimages, were canceled left and right. And into this gap, I was very impressed with the innovation of the first ever community virtual pilgrimage under JAMP, led by Kimiko Mar. I think that JAMP has really provided a welcome and much needed glue to bind us together at that time as a community when we were unable to gather in person. And it's amazing to think it's been 4 years now, but I think Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages continues to connect the community with virtual events like this one that can be accessed at home and accessed by residents living away from the major community centers or where they can't attend the events. So that being said, first film is one that focuses on the kind of the end of the story of the Heart Mountain boys, the end of the story of the draft resistance, which was their imprisonment in federal prisons, Leavenworth, Kansas, and for half of the Heart Mountain boys, McNeil Island, Washington, which was the home for also the Minidoka resistors. 2 years of imprisonment at McNeil Island, south of Seattle, here in Washington State. So this film was funded by the Washington State Civil Liberties Public Education Program, which is named in honor of the late Representative Kip Takuda. Film is about 10 minutes long, and when it's over, we'll have a live conversation with its subject, Takashi Hoshizaki, and with producer Kimiko Mar.
Okay. And also, if everybody could mute themselves while the video is playing, just in case some accidental noise comes in. Thank you.
The American public, even today, have no idea of what had happened to us. World War II time, they would consider us as draft dodgers, as traitors. As time went on, they began to realize we were now really trying to fight another battle, and where the people in the 442nd went out to fight the actual war in Europe and in Japan, whereas in our case, we were now trying to fight more of a legal battle. I'm Takashi Hoshizaki. I was actually born in 1925 and have virtually lived in Los Angeles most of my life, except during the war years and my service time. Living, I guess, in the same building that I was born. There were more open areas, empty lot, a vacant area that my cousin and I played in. My dad then decided to start his own business, So then we moved out to the Hollywood area. And the store he started in the Hollywood area was Fujiya cash and carry grocery stores. By 5 years later, he had saved enough money to buy a piece of property and then put a home on it. And 1937 was when we moved into our new home.
The greatest double cross in history. Jap envoys talk peace in Washington. Jap planes without warning bring war to America. Our great Pacific outpost in the Hawaiian Islands is ruthlessly bombed.
On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066. This order authorized the U.S. military to remove civilians from the west coast of the United States. The order did not specify any particular racial or ethnic group. However, Executive Order 9066 was used to specifically target people of Japanese ancestry, regardless of citizenship. In May of 1942, Takashi and his family were forced to leave their home in East Hollywood. The government sent them to the Pomona Assembly Center, located in Los Angeles County Fairgrounds. The Hoshizakis lived in poorly constructed, temporary barracks with hundreds of other families. In August of 1942, they were taken by train to the Heart Mountain Camp in Wyoming.
I think it's about a year and a half or later that I turned 18. And at that time, we were then required to register for the Selective Service.
In September 1940, over a year before the United States would enter World War II, President Roosevelt signed into law the Selective Training and Service Act. It required all men between the ages of 21 and 45 to register for the draft. Soon after the U.S. entered the war, the minimum age of registration was lowered to 18 and extended to age 65. The attack on Pearl Harbor also caused the U.S. military to change the classification of Japanese American men to 4C, alien enemy, meaning they were ineligible to serve. However, after over a year of fighting in the war, the U.S. military reversed its decision and reclassified Japanese American men as 1A, eligible to serve, meaning they could either voluntarily enlist in the Army or be drafted.
And I thought, well, this is crazy, you know. Here we were removed from our home, placed into these, what we now will consider as really were concentration camps, and then they're drafting us out. Why, as one of the other fellows said, he says, why should I go back and fight for civil rights and other things that the U.S. government had denied us? And so it was just one of these things. So things don't seem right, and I decided that, okay, I won't answer the draft call. And it was about, I guess, maybe a week or so later that the FBI, the marshals, then came around and picked me up. There were a total of 63 of us that had refused to go. There were so many of us that I think we filled most of the county jails in Wyoming.
In March of 1944, Takashi was arrested for violation of the Selective Service Act. Approximately 5,000 American men nationwide resisted the draft and were convicted of draft violations. Almost 300 of these men were Japanese Americans from 8 of the 10 War Relocation Authority camps. 63 resistors lived in the Heart Mountain Camp, including Takashi.
We had decided before the trial really began as to whether we'll have a jury trial or a judicial trial. And being at a wartime, the group felt that it would be very hard to get a jury that would be sympathetic to our thoughts. We bypassed the jury, hoping that the judge would then look at all the facts and come to a conclusion. Judge Kennedy, we find out that he was a racist, so things didn't go too well. So basically then we ended up with a 3-year sentence.
19-year-old Takashi was convicted of knowingly and willfully violating the Selective Service Act of 1940. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison at McNeil Island. McNeil Island was a federal penitentiary often compared to Alcatraz because of its location on a small island in Washington state.
So while there, I got a chance to then meet the other prisoners, the conscience objectors. I think we comprised something like 2/3 of the population there on the farm at the time. And the other prisoners would range all the way from murderers, burglars, and the whole line. I had an interview with the warden, and he asked me, how did I feel about being in the prison? And my response is, well, he says, I feel no different from being in camp. Searchlights, barbed wire, and restricted movements and so forth. But then I told him the only thing I would miss would be the family. With a 3-year sentence, we should then have appeared at a parole board to see if we would be released. 2 of the fellows working in the office at McNeil Island in the prison, in the warden's office, found letters from the camp directors indicating that do not give them a pardon, because then it would be like a slap on the wrist instead of service in the military.
Takashi was released from McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary on October 16, 1946, nearly 16 months after he was eligible for parole. His conviction, along with 1,500 men, was pardoned by President Truman on December 23, 1947.
When I got my second draft notice, the Korean War was on, and I was still young enough to be eligible, and there were apparently 6 of us who were still young enough from the Heart Mountain group that then served during the Korean conflict. I did have my civil rights back, and I was part of the U.S. community, enjoying the advantages of it. It's all right if it comes to being that I would be given the draft notice, all right, I would be more willing to go ahead and serve,
Today, Takashi and the other Japanese American resistors might have been able to make a case for deferment of the draft. This would be possible because they were incarcerated in concentration camps at the time.
But again, how do you get the people to really read or listen and understand the lack of civil rights in certain situations? But how do you educate the people on the civil rights and on the Constitution?
Well, 10 minutes goes by really fast, doesn't it? We have Takashi Hoshizaki with us here now live, and we're just going to spend just a few minutes here at this point. We'll take more questions after all 3 films are shown. Takashi, looking at it now, you've seen it a couple times now, the film, and of course the producer is here with us. But I want to ask you, what is your reaction to seeing the film and having your story in particular told as representing the Fair Play Committee? How do you feel about this film?
Well, it's always get surprised when suddenly I'm put in from where the story and the attention is focused. But the film itself really, I think, in a very concise way, showed as to what happened to us and how we, as the resistors, had then to endure the prison time. And so I think basically that the film that we just saw was a nice, concise presentation of me as a draft resistor.
One of the things, oh, that's good. That's good to hear, by the way. So I'm glad you liked it. One of the things that struck me in doing our film was that, and people responded to the idea that you were the one of the six who, uh, refused to be drafted in World War II. But then with the Korean War, you did. Did you enlist or were you drafted for the Korean War?
I'm sorry, missed that.
Were you drafted into the Korean War or did you enlist?
Oh no, I was drafted. I was finishing up my master's degree at UCLA, and I got my second draft notice, and so I asked the draft board, could I hold off until I got my degree, which they agreed to. And so I just pointed out in the a movie there that I had my civil rights back, the family was back home. These are sort of the points that the Fair Play Committee had made during the back the time that we were in the camp.
Yeah, it sort of puts the truth to the stand you were taking during World War II, that your resistance was conditioned on certain objections to your circumstances. Kimiko, I want to ask you real quickly, why did you feel you needed to make this film in particular about Takashi Hoshizaki and go to the trouble of raising the funds and doing it?
Well, we we had applied for the grant, the Kip Takuda grant, which is a Washington State grant, and so we needed to tell a Washington State story. And I've always been fascinated by McNeil Island. I didn't know much about it. And so, and I had been to many Heart Mountain pilgrimages and seen Takashi, being there. So I just thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could tell this story to, because the KIP Takuda grant is meant for educational purposes for K through 12 students, and it's supposed to focus on constitutional issues. What
You,
is a better story than that?
and you mentioned that this film has been streamed in classrooms in Washington State. I noticed that you have a narrator who's very young sounding. Was that a particular choice?
Oh yeah, I wanted so he is a high school
Wow.
young man,
Wow.
and I really wanted the high school students to identify, because they are almost the same age that Takashi was when he had to make that decision. So I wanted to really, maybe I was a little heavy handed, but I really wanted to drive home that that could be you, 80 years ago, that could be you. What would you have done? And I wanted them to think about that.
I think it works. Over the 10 minutes, his voice I grew accustomed to it, and it really seemed to bring the story. He carried the story well. So good job there. All right, listen, we're going to have more questions at the end of the films. Why don't we go ahead, Kimiko, to the second film? As I said, we're marking the 22nd anniversary of the National JACL's public ceremony, apologizing to the resistors. A public ceremony that was mandated by National Council JACL in the summer 2000 convention in Monterey, I believe, to have a public ceremony. So on May 11th, 2002, I brought a cameraman to record the event in San Francisco for a bonus feature for the second home video release of Conscience Constitution. I made it for what was then the new home video format of DVD. This is in 2002. This is the DVD. And this 8-minute featurette you're going to see is called The JACL Apologizes. It's on the second disc of the DVD. And tonight, I suppose is a streaming video premiere. So afterwards, we'll get Tak also to comment about what the apology meant to him and what the ceremony meant to him. So go ahead.
I'd like to welcome you to today's Nisei Resistors of Conscience Recognition and Reconciliation Ceremony. Today is a history-making day. After almost 60 years, the National JCL is formally recognizing and seeking to reconcile with the Nisei Resistors of Conscience.
I think it's something that we had to do. The resolution that was passed in Monterey said we have to have this ceremony, and Floyd Moore and I talked about it and said, rather than do this in some remote area in Arkansas, where it's not going to have any significance, it has to be something that has meaning.
Can I take a picture? Living so close, if we didn't show up, well, we figure, you know, after what you guys went through, we decide to, you know, come out.
You know, this is about understanding something about the resistors and to reconcile what we as an organization, what the JACL did, the position it took, and to restate that in a very different way through the apology.
You know, it's a real tragedy that we should be regarding each other as the enemy. I think the resistors, because we have been so prominent, might be the logical stepping stone to where the JCL could come around to approaching the whole Japanese American community in their role as government cronies during that critical period in our life. Because I think that that's where the real trauma lies.
So the focus of JACL during this stage of our past was patriotism. Today's ceremony is a clear recognition that JACL neglected to support the resistors of conscience in their protest against injustice. JACL offers a sincere apology for the painful experiences and memories caused by that neglect.
This is something that we didn't demand, we didn't ask for, and came from within their ranks, so I think that made it a little more meaningful.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Frank Abe.
I'm overwhelmed. I wish to extend my appreciation to the JACL for sponsoring this ceremony. This ceremony is especially meaningful to me as I was one of the organizers of the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee, and which legally challenged the constitutionality of drafting inmates from the concentration camps, and thus raised the ire of the wartime JACL leaders and bore the brunt of their vicious attacks.
The JACL leadership took it upon itself to define loyalty to government agencies despite their unjust policies as the only acceptable proof of one's patriotism. Those who protested the violation of their constitutional rights were condemned as disloyal and punished with physical isolation, psychological harassment, and social ostracism, the last two of which continues to this day.
Let us remember that it was the failure of our government that caused this controversy among us in the first place. And so I ask, why should we continue to hurt each other over what the government did to us? I think it would be entirely appropriate for JACL to go one step further and hold a similar program directed towards the Japanese American community for the excesses committed by wartime JACL leaders, such as acting as informants for the government, causing many innocent people to suffer. I believe such action would finally put to rest JACL's unholy ghosts of the past and would be a worthy way to start the 21st century. The United States government apologized for their wartime excesses. Can JACL do less? Thank you.
At this point, we'd like to have a recognition presentation to each one of the 21 resistors, and we'd like to present a small memento of this occasion to each one of the resistors.
Mr. Mitz Koshiyama from Heart Mountain Camp in San Jose. Mr. George Ishikawa from Heart Mountain. Mr. Hale Mimoru, Heart Mountain. Mr. George Nozawa of Heart Mountain. Mr. Bob Nagahara of Heart Mountain. Mr. Noboru Tagama, Amachi. Mr. George Kurosaki from Heart Mountain. Mr. Ken Yoshida, Topaz. And I believe finally here, Mr. Joe Yamakito from Jerome, Arkansas.
As I shook hands with the resistors, there were some genuine thank yous that I was very moved by. So I think it was well worth it if one of those resistors felt that the apology meant something.
Yeah, I'd like to thank all the veterans for what they did. Made life better for my kids. Thank you.
I'm glad we did it. You know, I'm proud the organization had the guts to do it. I think there will be some consequences for us among some of our members. But you know, that's life. I mean, we can't please everybody, and it's something that was too long coming.
I think everybody had the mindset on reconciliation already, and this was just a climax to everything that took so long to do, you know. To me, and a lot of other resistors, it means that the stigma that the wartime JCL placed upon us is gone. Let me put it this way, it's a step in the right direction.
You're muted, Frank.
It brings back a lot of feels of seeing the men who are all no longer with us. How's it feel to see Hale Mimomura and all those guys again?
Yeah, it's I just sort of think that here I am at 98, and I was the youngest of the 63, and so it's really kind of hard to think back and think that all the others have basically just passed on. And someone mentioned that it was kind of a shame that those who had passed on didn't really experience the changes that have occurred in the last few years.
Yeah. The I think that the point that Joe Yamakito made, that Marvin Uratsu made about, Marvin was with the MIS in San Francisco, saying that, we should not be pointing fingers at each other, the Nissan and the resistors, but really look at the government who did this to all of us and created divisions within the community that sadly, exist to this day in some cases. What do you think about that, Takashi?
Well, I look back in history and I find that many governments now, in order to control the people, will then get in there and deliberately split the group so that the two groups now are fighting each other like had happened to us, and not really directing the fight against the government, which then imposed all this. And I think we're finally getting to the stage where, hey, we're realizing that this has happened. And I think that as time goes on, it'll be sort of interesting. I'll probably be gone, but see that what will happen among even the other communities, not only the Japanese American community, but all the other communities in which I think if we look back, and even today, we can probably see this division, this split that was being imposed by the well, I say the government, the controlling group.
That's a fantastic point, Tack. I mean, in our community, the two divisions created by the community, very short, very brief, were the loyalty questionnaire, which created an administrative class of people in yes, yes, and no, no, one pile, and the segregation to the elect that followed. And then the reinstitution of the draft inside camp, which again divided the community between those who answered the call or volunteered, and those who, like you and Frank Abe, who said no. I'm going to make a quick plug right here for this new book that just was published today by Penguin Classics, Literature of Japanese American Incarceration, in which we break down those divisions that the government created in the community and which we've seen ourselves kind of fighting over for the last 80 years. So there's that. Thank you, Tack. We're going to move ahead with our third film before we come to our audience questions. We want to show one more film that focuses on a different Heart Mountain resistor, the late James Ueda of Rockland, California. This story is told through the eyes of the family that survives him. And this film was funded by a grant from the National Park Service. It's just under 7 minutes, and afterwards we'll get your questions and comments.
Yesterday in the multi-generational discussion, our discussion leader said something about the power of place.
After all these years, to learn that these things you thought were terrible might not have been that bad.
Yeah, might not have been that bad.
That's the power of opening up and talking about these things.
Yeah.
This whole experience has helped me so much understand Grandpa. Yeah.
A date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry were transported to an assembly center where they lived for months, eventually being transferred to one of 10 relocation centers.
He was the oldest of 6 children, born to immigrants. His father died from appendicitis when he was 13. So he and his mother were left in charge of a ranch and 5 little children.
Whenever there was a family crisis, they always turned to him because he was always the strong one, the one that they looked up to. And then after suppressing so much heavy issues for so long, his temper would get the best of him from time to time. I can remember getting the back of his hand a few times. And one time I remember so vividly, he hit my sister and knocked the wind out of her, and I thought she was dead. In retrospect, I can understand how he would, have that kind of rage.
His life should have just been opening up, but instead he got shipped off to this camp in the middle of nowhere. And how emasculating that must have been for him. And how he had no outlet for that rage that he must have felt, that anyone would have felt. And yet it was always just duty, 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 duty. I mean, when he decided that he was not going to allow himself to be drafted, did you ever learn what what the family's response was to that?
I think Grandma supported him all the way, but I think it was hard. I was so gratified to talk to Mr. Hoshizawa yesterday because he, as you know, served time with Grandpa in McNeil Island. And I asked him questions like, what was your everyday living conditions like? Well, at first, of course, they put them behind bars for about a month, and then they realized that he and the others weren't a threat. So they put them in a dormitory kind of arrangement. And I'm sure that made a huge difference. And then they sent Grandpa to what's called the farm on McNeil Island. So it's a self-contained island just outside of Puget Sound. And he was taught how to milk a cow and raise hogs. And the island supplied the prisoners with meat and milk and everything. They didn't have to order from the outside. That really made me feel good. Because I imagined prison life to be horrible.
Turns out it wasn't that bad.
And it wasn't that bad.
It wasn't that bad.
That's the power of opening up and talking about these things.
Yeah.
It's so hard, but once you do it, you can share experiences with people who have gone through similar paths.
Coming here is such a reminder of like how he got that way. And also it's so inspiring because despite all that, he was a very loving person. My dad was kind of missing in action for a number of years when I was really small, and he took me to the father-daughter dance. Yeah. He was a good guy.
So how do you guys feel?
I feel emotionally drained because I didn't want to cry.
That's tough.
That's the most natural
Yeah.
thing in the world. You'd rather be a human being.
Don't let me start again.
It's okay. Talking about your own family and the trauma that they experienced. I'm proud of you, Mom.
Yeah.
I'm just so proud of my family, you guys. I'm just so
We're very lucky. Yeah.
And well, here we see the impact of the story on the families of the resistors. John Hoshizaki, turn your camera on and unmute yourself. I'm going to ask you to come to for a question real quick here. Seeing this film now, you're the Tak Hoshizaki's son, of course, and I'm meeting you here for the first time. What was your experience about, first learning of your father's story?
Yeah, well, I first learned about it when I was in high school. And back then the Vietnam War was going in force. So it was, it was something that was, what he did was something that, was always in the news and that people were doing. So, I viewed it as, as a positive thing, and some pretty, everybody I knew views it at a positive thing because of the, the time and the situations, the Vietnam War raging and all the protests about the war.
I mean, in making the Conscious Constitution 25 years ago, one of the most gratifying things was, like we saw with the James Weta story, the finally for the children of the resistors to have their father's experience or their story legitimized, centered, and explained in a way that correctly framed them as not draft dodgers who spent 2 years in federal prison, but as young men who contested incarceration on principle. It sounds like your father never hid his story from you, as many other fathers did.
That's true. But I think, as I learned more about the story, just a general incarceration story, when I talked to my parents, ages ago, it was, oh, it wasn't such a big deal. It wasn't so bad. But I think the stories come out that it really was not good at all. My observations and later things that I've learned.
Yeah. Tak, did you when your children were growing up, and I met your other daughter too, by the way, did you consciously decide to, be open with them about not only the fact you were in a concentration camp, but, on top of it, you spent 2 years in a federal penitentiary. Did you make a conscious decision to tell them both sides of the story?
Well, it was one of the things where I thought, well, one of these days I'll have to stop and excuse me, tell my two kids what had happened. And I guess, as John pointed out, the Vietnam War was going on, and so the idea of protesting was not something that was out of the blue. The people were protesting, and I guess in our conversation that we had at the time that I told the kids about myself and imprisonment, I think I can't quite remember exactly what it says, but it says, you were the first resistor or the objectors of, and then I thought about it and I said, well, I guess we were a whole generation ahead of the time here. So anyway, but the other thing was when I was released, I went back to school, and the interesting thing was I went to LACC, and if I have the numbers correct, there are about 8,000 students there, and the GIs are all coming back. And I think out of the 8,000, there's something like 6,000 engineers. And to me, I was sort of interested in being an engineer. I said, well, that's not going to go to work. So then I decided that I'll go on and help my dad run his nursery. So that was a change of career. But I never really spoke much about that to all the other veterans. We did things together. And as you saw one picture where we had a skiing club at LACC. And so we would go out for a whole weekend. But then I never talked much about as a resistor, and just sort of blended in. And it was years later that finally some situation came up, and so I had to sort of explain my relationship with a certain person, and then tell them, yes, so that's where I met them in prison. So it was a gradual changing, opening, and more people then began to learn about my history.
Wonderful. Good. Thank you, Tak. We have about 5 more minutes left to say, and this is everyone's chance here who's watching to ask a question of Tak or John or Kimiko. So I invite you now to turn your camera on and just go live and ask your question. And we'll start, Julie, if you don't mind, to go ahead and do that. You have a question, Julie? I know you think it's not important, but
well,
yeah, there you are.
I want to thank Kimiko and Frank for making these films, and Takashi and John for sharing your story. So important and relevant today, and so important for future generations. But what and it's just been a pleasure to know you all. But I have a question. I've been trying to learn more about everything. There's just an infinite amount of information. But I was curious because the original, going back, the original classification of the young men, Japanese American men, was 4C, right? They were deemed alien enemy. Okay, and that was part of the outrage, right? because suddenly a year later, then they were deemed, okay, now you're 1A, and they could be, they would be required to register, and then they could be drafted. So
Yes.
I know that we sort of surmise there are various reasons why, but what were some of the documented reasons why that happened?
Tack, you want to take that? Otherwise, I'll go ahead and answer it.
Well, I guess it was a time the 100th and the 42nd were fighting in Europe. And as we know, they were the most highly decorated outfit for the length of time in service. And so, which then really meant from looking at it from the dark side, that they had lost a lot of men. And so my take of the situation at that time was that the Army now suddenly needed replacements. And so they looked to the people, the guys like us in the camp, and thought that, well, we'll just go ahead and ask for volunteers. And not knowing that we were in concentration camps and we had a different attitude than the Hawaiians. And when the Hawaiians were asked, was given the opportunity to volunteer, 10,000 of them showed up. And so I guess the Army has figured the same thing, that opened up the volunteering for the camps, and about 10,000 of us would show up, but that wasn't the case. So eventually from volunteering, they shifted over finally to draft us in order to get some replacement to fill up the ranks that were decimated in the fighting.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting twist. I mean, being, classified in enemy alien, then fit to draft, and then when he went back to serve again, he was asked to work on a top secret weapons project. So it's kind of a funny twist of priorities.
Of course, and in addition to Takashi, the our community leadership in the JACL, the wartime JACL, advocated for restoration of the draft for the Nisei even before the loyalty questionnaire came out, and as early as fall of '42. And one of the reasons was that it would be regaining a right, that if we could be drafted or serve in the military, then we would be demonstrating that we were equal Americans, that if we could serve in the military, then we would be equal Americans, subject to military service on an equal basis as everyone else. And it was seen as a step towards regaining their civil rights. So thank you. Who has another question? Please don't be shy. I'm really impressed, by the way, by the number of turnout for this. Yes, go ahead. Kimiko, do you want to ask a question of Tack?
No, I was just gonna. I'm just gonna start calling people out. Barbara Takei, would you like to say anything? since you were typing in the chat. There you are. Called you out.
Well, I thank you for organizing this program, Kimiko, and putting together the video of the interview with Tack, who, well, one of the things I have always thought was interesting about the draft resistors is that you continued meeting and getting together after the war, right?
I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting about many of the draft resistors at Heart Mountain is that you continued to meet and get together socially and politically, supporting one another after the war.
Yeah, well, we had, I guess, some of the older people, older men then, we did gather together, but we also had support from people like Frank Chin as well, and I can quickly remember. And so we had individuals who were supportive to the resistors. And so I guess they decided, well, get together and socialize a bit. But as time went on, I think I guess we lost some of the people, and then we slowly dissolved away. We were never really as an organized group, so that was a sort of a fault. And so that because of that, I think the group slowly dissolved. And although we did keep contact with a few, I did kept contact with a few of the resistors, and also kept in contact with some of the CEOs that were in McNeil Island.
You know, Barbara, to that point, I think it's interesting that Heart Mountain was the only organized draft resistance, and by being organized, you know, it seems like, and we've seen today, the bonds that they formed with each other, both in camp, in the Fair Play Committee organizing, collecting dues, you know, taking names, and also in prison itself. So, in 1947, Yoshi Kuromiya sent out a photograph of their release, their group photo. The famous group photo on still in Silicon at the ferry dock of Silicon when they were ferried out of McNeil Island. Yosh sent that as a Christmas card to all the resistors for whom he had addresses, and for years after the war, many of them lived in the Mountain View, San Jose area, and George Nozawa, who you saw in my film, had a would sponsor had a restaurant or had a restaurant, and they would gather at George's restaurant. I'm sorry, not George's restaurant. It was his friend. His name completely escapes me right now. The quiet one, the quiet resistor. They would gather in Mountain View at this restaurant for, you know, like semi-annual meetings, and just take pictures again, and shoot the breeze, catch up with. And did you ever go to any of those TAC at George Nozawa's friend's place?
I really don't remember, but I do remember driving up to the San Jose area, and we did get together, and yeah, as you say, we ended up at the restaurants or say shooting the breeze. Yeah. But if you don't mind, I would like to make a correction. That photograph of us at Silicon that was taken when we were released was actually taken. Oh gosh, I can't. Sorry, that's mine. So it was not taken by Yosh, but was taken by one of the other resistors. And in fact, there were two pictures like that were then sent out as Christmas cards at that time. And I took those two Christmas card pictures and examined them under magnification, and picked up the one that had the best definition, and had the one of the Photoshops blowed up. And then I gave that to Yoshi Kuromiya. And then that's where Yosh then took control of it. Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't think of the name of the guy that photo I used.
Okay,
sorry.
That's wonderful, TAC. I mean, thanks for that correction, because I depend on the memory of you and guys like you to fill in these blanks in the story. Yeah. So that's good. But you took the photograph and had it enlarged. You did a good job, because that photograph, of course, now is, you know, used everywhere. Yeah. I get asked about it all the time. So thank you very much.
But yeah, I've always felt that fellowship kept alive many of the memories that people had, and you know, and also provided a great deal of support among you. So it's and I think that was something that we all felt at that ceremony.
Kenji points out that the Cozy Sakai. It was Cozy Sakai. Thank you, Kenji, for prompting my ancient memory. Cozy, right?
Yeah, I remember the name Cozy. Yeah.
Cozy Sakai, very quiet, and George Nozawa's son evidently is online. I don't recognize George Nozawa's son, but do you mind popping on if you're here still? Unmuting. Okay, I don't see his name. Okay, well, feel free to just jump in anywhere. While George's son jumps on, Barbara, I want to kind of wrap up a little bit in terms of the present and future. in that we had this JCL ceremony 22 years ago this week, apologizing to the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee, who were mostly answered yes, yes in the questionnaire. National JCL still is struggling with a resolution apologizing to the Tule Lake segregees and the renunciants, which is a whole different story, a different experience, but they're lumped together with the Heart Mountain Resistors as, you know, no-no boys, so-called no-no boys. What do we see a need still for JCL to follow through with a stronger resolution than that which they adopted at the last national convention?
Well, so initially going into that, what was it, 2019 convention,
Yeah.
a committee in the JCL developed a resolution that was really, it felt like a sincere apology from the organization. And, you know, to acknowledge that people did things for different reasons and that there was integrity and courage in all of the choices that people made. Unfortunately, at the convention, a group of JCLers who apparently didn't like the resolution's language inserted new language that justified and defended the JCL's hostility toward the no-nos and the renunciants, and also attacked various individuals or groups or certain actions, blaming, attacking, criticizing. And it really, I mean, the additional language really made it a non-apology. So
Do you see a movement for a new apology?
Well, I would hope that the JCL would recognize that that was not an apology and that they need to redo the language. They should just revert back to the original resolution, adopt that resolution, and then perhaps we can move forward on an apology. But again, I think all of the people who were of the age to resist, nearly all are gone, or maybe not in a position to travel. So it is a missed opportunity. The organization undermined its own desire to be a civil rights organization. And it's really a tragedy. It's really a shame.
So 80 years later, we still have this tiny bit of unfinished business, perhaps. So on that note, it's 1 hour, it has passed. And so I want to thank you all for joining us. Wonderful turnout. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks to the filmmakers who made these films. And thank you to Kimiko Mar, I see you there, for organizing and hosting us today. So thank you all and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye, Tack.
Bye, Tack.
Bye, Tack. Thank you, Tack.
All right. Very well done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.